They said I drained her savings, called me a thief behind my back, and told everyone I betrayed my own mother. But not one of them stopped to ask why the bank statements were being mailed to my sister's address, or why Mom always begged me not to leave when I packed a bag just to take a break. It wasn't just the accusation that hurt. It was the fact that my silence, my loyalty, my love, had become invisible. They didn't care how many nights I stayed up changing her bedsheets, how many times I caught her when she fell, or how often I missed work to sit by her side while she cried from the confusion of her stroke. They didn't care that I gave up my apartment, my career, and my life to become her full-time caretaker. To them, I was just the one who stayed, the one it would be easiest to blame. My name is Elora Jacobs. I never tried to be the favorite. I just happened to be the only one who showed up when our mother couldn't feed herself or remember her own name. It started quietly. After her stroke, I moved into the old family house. It smelled of old books and lavender, and it creaked like it was grieving with her. My siblings, Caleb, Janice, and Drew, offered polite promises in the beginning. "Let us know if you need anything," Janice said, before vanishing for 2 months. "I'll try to come by this weekend," Drew mumbled. Every weekend. Caleb showed up twice in 3 months, mostly to rummage through the attic for Dad's old watch. None of them stayed. Not when she wet herself in the middle of dinner. Not when she forgot her name and screamed that strangers were in the house. Not when the medical bills started piling up and I had to take on debt just to get her prescriptions. So I didn't complain. I thought, maybe they just don't know how to handle illness. Not everyone does. But everything shifted the day I went to pay the bills. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday. Rainy. The house was cold and quiet. Mom was asleep in the recliner. I logged into her bank account like I always did, ready to pay the utilities, and I froze. The account balance was almost gone. $62.41. It didn't make sense. Mom had saved for years. Her pension, retirement, plus the emergency fund she never touched even when Dad died. There should have been thousands. I stared at the transaction history, my stomach twisting. $300 withdrawn here. $250 there. Then larger amounts, $800. $1,000. All from an ATM 2 cities away. All over the course of weeks. At first I thought it was fraud. Identity theft. Maybe someone got her card details. But then I checked the mailing address linked to the bank account. It had been changed to Janice's apartment. And suddenly everything made a horrible kind of sense. Janice had offered to help with some financial paperwork the month before. Said she'd drop the files off but never did. I didn't think twice. I was too busy bathing Mom and cleaning vomit off the kitchen floor. But now I saw it. The withdrawals. The change of address. The fact that Janice, the most absent of us all, had suddenly bought a new phone, gotten her nails done weekly, and posted vacation photos from an Airbnb near the coast. I wanted to believe it wasn't her. I needed to believe it wasn't her. So I did what I always do. I stayed quiet. I waited. I searched for more proof. And while I was gathering evidence, my siblings were gathering suspicion. Because the next thing I knew, they called a family meeting. And they didn't come to talk. They came to accuse. When I finally confronted my siblings, I came with calm. I came with concern. I thought maybe they'd listen, that somewhere beneath all the blame and bitterness there was still love. But I was wrong. They didn't ask questions. They didn't check the facts. They didn't even hesitate. "You're the one living here," Janice snapped, arms folded like a verdict had already been passed. "You have her bank card," Caleb barked, pacing like a prosecutor in a courtroom I never agreed to enter. "Just admit it," Drew muttered, shaking his head. "You're broke and desperate. You needed the money." And in that moment I wasn't their sister. I was a suspect. A problem. An inconvenience they wanted out of the picture. I stared at them, stunned. My heart beat against my ribs like it was trying to escape the betrayal sitting across from me. These were the same people who missed Mom's birthday last year. The same people who showed up empty-handed on holidays and posted photos from brunch while I was giving our mother a sponge bath. I wanted to scream, to yell, to remind them of the nights I didn't sleep, the times I cried in silence when Mom forgot my name, the job interviews I skipped to take her to therapy. But I didn't. Because people who want to misunderstand you will never hear the truth when it's handed to them. But what they didn't know, what they refused to see, was that I had already begun quietly collecting the truth they were too blind to look for. I didn't want to accuse anyone out of hurt or suspicion. I wanted certainty. So I'd gone to the bank, requested printed statements. examined each transaction, called the branches, even requested footage under our mother's account access, and eventually it came. The grainy black and white video showed someone in a hoodie and large sunglasses withdrawing cash, again and again. But it wasn't just the posture or the familiar purse on her arm that gave it away. It was the shoes. Those red limited edition designer heels that Janice swore she had to sell last fall to make rent. The ones she cried about during Christmas dinner, pretending to be broke while wearing a gold necklace Mom had given me before her stroke. I recognized them instantly. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because I knew what they'd say. That's not proof. That could be anyone. Why were you spying? No, I needed them to see it for themselves, before they threw me out of the home I had turned into a sanctuary. So I printed the footage, slipped it into a plain white envelope and waited. The opportunity came quicker than I expected. They demanded a second family meeting. Said it was time to set boundaries. Caleb took the lead, calling it a safety measure. Drew followed with phrases like, neutral decision-making. Janice acted heartbroken, as if my alleged theft had shattered her soul. They surrounded me in the living room like a firing squad. Caleb's voice boomed. We've talked about it and we think it's best you leave the house for Mom's safety. Drew added, we'll figure out a rotating schedule for care, but you can't stay here anymore. It's not working. And Janice, ever the performer, let a single tear roll down her cheek. I just can't believe you do this to her, Alora. To us. I sat still. Let them speak. Let them build their little tower of righteousness. Then I slid the envelope across the coffee table, slow and quiet, and said with every ounce of calm I had left, before you throw me out, open it. The silence that followed was thick. The kind of silence that chokes and exposes. Caleb looked confused. Drew frowned. Janice stiffened. Caleb picked up the envelope, ripped the seal, pulled out the photos, and everything stopped. His eyes scanned the grainy stills. Then another. Then the close-up of Janice's shoes. Then the timestamp. Janice's breath caught. Drew leaned over his shoulder and whispered, "Is that?" Janice stood up suddenly, knocking over her glass of water. "This doesn't prove anything," she snapped. "You went through my stuff? You're stalking me now." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, the sister I used to braid hair with, the one who held my hand at Dad's funeral, and waited for even a flicker of guilt to show in her eyes. There was none. Mom sat in the corner, quiet, confused at first, then slowly sinking into understanding. Her eyes moved from Janice to me, then to the pictures. Her lip trembled. "Alora," she whispered. "You didn't?" "No, Mom," I said softly, tears finally stinging my throat. "I didn't." And for the first time in months she reached for my hand, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with knowing. She remembered. She knew who I was. And she finally saw who Janice really was. The silence that followed was suffocating. Not the kind that feels peaceful or calm, but the kind that screams underneath your skin. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the shallow wheeze of Mom's breathing, and the unspoken panic rising like smoke. Janice's face went pale, drained of its carefully curated indignation. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Caleb leaned forward, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, his eyes darting across the photos like they might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough. Drew just froze, one hand midair like he forgot what it was supposed to be doing. And then from the recliner where she sat wrapped in a blanket too big for her frail frame, my mother's voice cracked through the tension. "What's in there?" she asked softly, eyes glassy but sharp in that moment. Janice moved before anyone else could. She lunged for the envelope, snatched it from Caleb's hands with a jerk, and tore it open like it might contain something she could still control. Her eyes landed on the first photo, the security still showing a hooded figure at the ATM. The next, a close-up of the shoes. Red, tiny, distinct. The third, a timestamp. The exact hour she claimed to be with Mom at the clinic. She flinched, blinked hard. Her throat bobbed. This isn't what it looks like." Caleb looked at her. "Those are your shoes." "No," she shot back, her voice rising too fast, too shrill. "Someone must have stolen them. Borrowed them. You can't even see the face." Drew stepped forward and took a closer look at the image. "That's your purse too." Janice's breath caught. "You guys are unbelievable. You're just going to take her side?" After everything. But the fight in her voice was starting to crack. The performance was failing. And I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Because the truth, undeniable, inarguable truth, was already in the room. Breathing between us. Heavy and cold and final. My mother turned her head slowly. Her eyes found Janice's eyes that had once watched her first steps, kissed her scraped knees, braided her hair for picture day. She didn't speak. She just stared. Then her lips began to tremble. Her eyes filled. And she cried. Not out of confusion. Not from pain. But from heartbreak. Because there's a special kind of devastation that comes when you realize the child you once held to your chest, the one you sang lullabies to, has not only lied to you, but was willing to let your other child be sacrificed in their place. And as she cried, she didn't reach for Janice. She reached for me. Her trembling fingers barely curled around mine, but they didn't have to be strong. The gesture said enough. I had never seen my mother look so defeated. And in that moment, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow. Because all I ever wanted was for the truth to come out. Not to humiliate anyone, not to win. I wanted to be heard. To be believed. To be seen. But what I got was something far more tragic. The proof that the family I fought to keep together had already fallen apart. Because I hadn't lost my siblings the day they accused me. I lost them the moment they looked into my eyes. Eyes that had once cried with them at our father's funeral, laughed with them around birthday cakes, begged them to come home for holidays, and didn't think I was worth asking the truth from. That was the moment something irreparable cracked inside me. They didn't just doubt me. They erased me. Janice didn't even fight. She fled the room like guilt had a weight too heavy to carry, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a ticking clock on everything we once were. Caleb leaned back into the couch, the envelope still in his hands, his mouth slightly open, stunned into a silence he rarely knew. And Drew, always sarcastic, always cocky, just stared at the floor, shame creeping up his neck like a storm he never saw coming. His hands hung uselessly at his sides. He didn't offer one of his usual half-baked justifications. He didn't even try. Because for once, there was nothing left to say. But then I felt her, my mother. Still trembling, still smaller than I ever remembered her being, she lifted her hand toward me. Weak, picky, but reaching. I crossed the room slowly, like I was approaching the last fragile piece of my childhood, terrified it would crumble in front of me. I knelt beside her. She looked so tired, so weathered, like the betrayal had aged her more than the stroke ever did. She didn't speak right away. He just pulled me in. Her arms were thin. Her breath was shallow. But the way she held me, firm, desperate, told me everything. And then, through a voice that trembled but didn't break, she whispered, I knew. I pulled back slightly, my eyes already stinging. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it, she said, blinking away tears. Not about her. Not about the others. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just heartbroken over what Janice did. She was mourning the family she thought she had, the illusion of unity she'd spent decades trying to keep alive. She had seen the signs, Janice's sudden spending, the excuses, the distance. But she wanted to believe it was stress. Grief. Not intentional betrayal. And definitely not at the cost of her other daughter's dignity. It hit me hard. Not just because she knew, but because she chose silence, hoping things would heal on their own. Because deep down she feared the truth more than the lie. And so had I. For months I kept hoping that one of them would ask. That Caleb would pull me aside. That Drew would text. That Janice would crack and confess, even privately. But none of them did. And now, they didn't just lose my trust. They lost the right to stand beside me like nothing happened. Because sometimes what breaks a family isn't the crime. It's the silence that follows. The fallout was messy. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quietly devastating. Like the sound of something precious breaking in another room and no one rushing in to pick up the pieces. Janice didn't come home for weeks. No calls. No texts. Just absence. The kind that felt less like regret and more like avoidance. She'd been exposed, and instead of owning it, she vanished, hoping the silence would erase the damage. Caleb tried to play mediator, the same way he did when we were kids and someone broke Mom's face. But his words now felt thin, rehearsed. Half apologies laced with phrases like, we all make mistakes, and let's not dwell. It wasn't remorse. It was reputation management. Drew didn't say anything at all. He never mentioned the envelope, never said sorry out loud. But one morning I found a bottle of wine on the front porch with a sticky note attached in his messy handwriting. Sorry, I was wrong. No name, no explanation. Just 7 words that weighed heavier than I expected. But none of it fixed anything. Because trust, once broken in a family, isn't like a glass you can glue back together. It's more like a mirror that always shows the cracks, no matter how carefully you try to polish it. You can still see yourself in it, but never quite the same way again. So I stayed with Mom. She didn't ask me to, but she didn't have to. After everything, her reaching for my hand was enough. That one moment had said stay. And I did. The days became slow, quiet, repetitive. I cooked her meals. We watched old films together. I read to her on the porch in the afternoons. There were hard days, of course. Days when she forgot my name again, when she wept out of confusion or pain. But there was peace too. And honesty. Something we hadn't had between us for years. And even though the tension with my siblings never truly vanished, it just faded into silence. Something strange happened in the months that followed. People began to treat me differently. Not out of pity, not out of sudden admiration, but out of recognition. Extended family who hadn't called in years began to check in. We heard what happened, they'd say cautiously, offering prayers and awkward pauses, but underneath it all was a new tone. A quieter kind of respect. Old friends from school reached out. People I hadn't spoken to in a decade. I heard your story, one of them messaged. You were brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. And then one afternoon, Mom's lawyer arrived unexpectedly with a folder under his arm. He sat at the kitchen table, folded his hands, and looked at me with quiet seriousness. She wants to update her will, he said. I blinked. She already has one. She wants to make it clearer. He opened the folder and handed me the document, and I saw it. Everything. The house. The savings. The land in Vermont. All in my name. I didn't ask for it. I never once brought it up. But Mom had seen what the others refused to, not just my loyalty but my loneliness. The weight I carried. The silence I endured. And she wasn't rewarding me. She was protecting me, in the only way she could. Mom had already changed it. Quietly, weeks before the bank account scandal exploded everything. She didn't announce it. She didn't warn anyone. She just did what mothers often do. Protect the child who protects them even if the rest of the world misunderstands it. She left everything to me. Not out of favoritism. Not to punish the others. But because, in her words, scribbled in her unsteady handwriting on the final page of her will, I needed someone who wouldn't just inherit my house, but my heart, my dignity, my story. And she was right. I hadn't just stayed with her. I had carried her, physically, emotionally, spiritually, through her final chapter. And she had seen that. Even when my siblings refused to. She saw everything. The late nights. The bills I paid with my own dwindling savings. The shaking hands I held. The meals I made from scratch. The quiet grief I swallowed every time she forgot my name again. She saw me. Long before the world did. When she passed 6 months later, the house was still. No shouting matches. No grand reconciliations. No desperate bids for forgiveness. Just silence. It was only me standing by her grave, holding her favorite scarf. The soft gray one she wore on cold mornings when she watched the sun rise through the kitchen window. The one she let me borrow every time I cried as a child. I held it to my chest and whispered the same promise I made every night while she was sleeping. I never let you fall. And I didn't. Even when the world doubted me. Even when my own siblings tried to erase me from her life. I stayed. Because love, real love, doesn't abandon you when it gets hard. It sits beside you quietly even when no one claps for it. I spent the next year alone in that house, sorting through old boxes and older memories. I found photographs with corners curled and forgotten letters she wrote to Dad after he died. I found parts of her I never knew, soft, hidden things she never told anyone. And in discovering them, I began rediscovering myself too. I didn't reach out to my siblings. And they didn't reach out to me. Until one cold morning, nearly a year to the day since she passed, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Hi, came a voice, hesitant, cracked. It was Janice. There was silence before she spoke again. I don't expect you to say anything. I don't know why I'm calling. I guess I thought maybe enough time had passed. I didn't respond right away. Because forgiveness isn't about pretending it never happened. It's about deciding whether healing is still possible. And in that moment I didn't know the answer. So I said the only thing I could. I'm listening. I know sorry isn't enough, Janice said, her voice trembling over the line. But I lost myself. I was scared, angry, jealous. And I thought if I could just blame someone else, it would make it easier. There was a long pause. Not the kind that asks for a response, but the kind that waits, not knowing if healing is even possible. I didn't say I forgave her. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because forgiveness, real forgiveness, takes more than a whispered apology. It takes time, accountability, change, and wounds that deep don't close overnight. So I didn't hang up, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to get the last word. It isn't to fight, to scream, to demand repayment for every bruise on your heart. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply choose peace. Not for them, but for yourself. As I had already lost enough. My trust. My innocence. The version of family I used to believe in. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need justice. I needed peace. The kind that lets you sleep at night without bitterness gnawing your chest. So that's what I chose. And that's what I built. Because in the end they accused me of theft, of betrayal, of breaking the family apart. But all I ever stole was the responsibility they abandoned. And for the first time in years, I no longer felt guilty for carrying what they dropped. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories.